The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Ski Sundown in nearby New Hartford, Connecticut, offering first-timer lesson packages for beginner skiers and snowboarders. Online registration available at skisundown.com. Winter made better.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, senior editor at Merriam Webster and our resident wordster, Emily Brewster, digs through the refuse to explore the origins of the terms 86 and Deep Six.
But first, a new look at the sordid past of the United States and how it's treated its young indigenous population.
With someone who you'll have a chance to meet on Thursday at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley, and whose CV is just enormous.
So let's start with the cliff notes before we get into his new novel. John Sayles is an independent film director, screenwriter, actor, and novelist. He has twice been nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for Passion Fish in 1992 and Lone Star in 1996.
He's written and directed and or script doctored some of our favorite films: Eight Men Out, Brother from Another Planet, Matewan, the movie version of our friend's book, The Spiderwick Chronicles, and so many more, some of which you wouldn't even know he script doctored secretly, uncredited. He's also directed 3 Bruce Springsteen videos, all off of the Born in the USA album. John and his partner in life and crime, I'll add, Maggie Renzi, are both graduates from Williams College right here in the 413.
Apart from his stellar film work, John Sayles has written 8 novels, including the massive Jamie McGillivray, The Renegade's Journey, which was a New York Times Book Review's editor's choice, and for which we had John on the show 2 years ago, right at the beginning when we were starting out.
Yep.
His most recent novel is To Save the Man, which sheds light on an American tragedy, the Wounded Knee Massacre, and the cultural genocide experienced by the Native American children at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School.
John Sayles will be talking about his new book live in person at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley this Thursday, January 30th at 7 p.m. Welcome back to the show, John Sayles.
Thanks for having me.
I think when people, perhaps, or if they know their history, see the title of this book, it sends chills immediately up their spine. To Save the Man. Can you talk about the title, where it comes from, and how it plays into your historical fiction, but based on a very real history?
Yeah, it was kind of the fundraising motto of Captain Richard Pratt, who started the Carlisle Indian Industrial School shortly after the Civil War. And he was, in a weird way, a progressive in his time. If you can be called a progressive, because everybody else at the time wanted to exterminate the rest of the Indians who hadn't already been killed. His idea, having been the commanding officer of both African American troops and having been the commanding officer of Indian scouts from various tribes, he came away feeling like, well, these people are just as smart as we are. What's holding them back? Well, in the case of the Native Americans, they don't speak English, and their culture is so opposed to ours. It just has nothing to do with ours. Their only hope is for us to educate them in the white man's path, and that means to save the man, we must kill the Indian. We must get rid of his language and his culture.
And killing the Indian is just what happened, both literally and figuratively, at this very real school, the Carlisle School.
In many ways, like both self-inflicted and through actions that happened there, and sickness as they came in, too.
Right, which is portrayed horribly and wonderfully, I guess, in your new historical fiction. A lot of this also pertains to the Dawes Act, which is also mentioned in your book, of another piece of very real history. Can you tell us about the Dawes Act and how that factors in to some of the storyline that you bring into this new book?
Yeah, the Dawes Act came in the late 1880s and started to, reservation by reservation, be applied in the 1890s. It was basically another land grab. Since they were defeated by the American army, most tribes were at the whim of the American government. Native Americans were not counted as U.S. citizens until 1924, so either they were hostiles or they were wards of the state. And a bunch of people who kind of looked at, especially the Dakota Territory, which was about to be made into two states, North Dakota and South Dakota, and some of the other Indian territories. What's presently Oklahoma was just called Indian Territory for a long time. And they felt like, well, the Indians are just chasing buffaloes or around that land, and they're hunting and fishing and having a good time, and we could do better things with that land. So we have to stamp out this socialism of the tribe owning the land and make sure that individuals own it and they have the American right to sell that land. So the Dawes Act came in saying, well, we're going to, these poor Indians can't own their own land. The tribe owns it and tells them what to do. We're going to give them the American right of individualism. But basically, it was a way to get individuals to own the land. And once the buffalo were gone, not be able to make a living and start selling pieces of it off. My main character, Antoine Lemaire, is at the Carlisle School very precisely because his father, being half French, doesn't qualify as an Indian, but if he has a kid at the Carlisle Indian School, he's an Indian. So he kind of takes one for the family, and they get to keep their land.
We're speaking with author and filmmaker John Sayles about his new book. He will be at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley this Thursday talking about the book, To Save the Man. There are so many parallels, I guess, from a literary perspective that you bring into this book that are fascinating in conjunction with the history, in my opinion. One of them has to do with the Longfellow poem, Hiawatha, and the recitation by Indigenous people of this poem that in some ways is very problematic at this Carlisle school. And it almost acts as a critique of Pratt, Captain Pratt, the character who we mentioned that had that quote, to save the man. Talk about the inclusion of the Longfellow poem as sort of a narrative arc throughout the course of this historical fiction.
Yeah, in doing my research and reading the school newspapers and looking at photographs from the time, one of the things I saw was, it's Thanksgiving, and here are these Indian kids dressed up like pilgrims in a pageant with other Indian kids dressed up like Indians, but not necessarily the Indians that they are.
Right.
More like Plains Indians, because, they had the feathers and the beads at the school. So there was this replacement of the actual culture of the kids who were going there with this kind of romantic, in the mists of time, these wonderful people existed, American version.
Right.
It's stated, yes, there was, a Hiawatha and there was a Minnehaha, but they weren't Dakotas and they weren't Ojibways. He kind of fudged things to make it fit the poem. And you need something that rhymes well. And it was kind of, this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to learn this new official story. And that's what you carry into the future, not the legends of your own people. And at the Carlisle School, because there were kids from tribes all over the country, as far away as Alaska and Florida, these kids had really varied backgrounds, different religions, different, creation stories, different ways of becoming a man or a woman. And so, like most school, it's a socializing instrument. It was for immigrants. It is to this day a socializing instrument, and it's a battleground. I mean, I think that's the thing. If we think about what's been going on in education, especially the teaching of history in the past couple of years, it's always been a battleground.
It's one of the observations that's made by your main character, Antoine, that there's so many tribes that would have been fighting had they not been at the school. And the fact that they aren't is this weird headspace that it puts him in.
Uh-huh.
And similarly, like you're mentioning about the Longfellow poem, like there's this beautiful contrast there with the moment that another one of your characters, Clarence Regal, recites this poem in that language that is a direct critique of everything that they've had. And I won't say anything else about Clarence Regal because that ruins a lot of the book for people where you should read it. But it was a super cool turning point in, I think, those characters reframing where they were and how they were at that school.
Yeah, I think one thing that happened that I tried to bring out is that these kids became Carlisle Indians, and they became it on the surface by obeying all the rules and not getting in trouble and doing their lessons. And as one of the phrases of the school, getting better every day. If you're there for 6 or 8 years and you're getting better every day, just think how bad you must have been when you got there. But they also became Carlisle Indians in that they started to form this kind of pan-Indian, comradeship that eventually became political. There were Carlisle graduates among the people who finally got the government to make Native Americans American citizens in 1924. People got married to tribes people from tribes they never would have met otherwise. And the kids, after they learned to read and write, or already knew how to read and write, kept up correspondences and friendships with each other that were made at the school. So I think, like most boarding school stories, there's what the kids have to do in front of the teachers, but also there's this secret life and this secret bond that they have, that helps them survive.
We're speaking with author and film director, screenwriter, and actor John Sayles, whose new book is To Save the Man. He'll be at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley on Thursday. One of the things that really stood out to me is that it would have been very easy to demonize to the hilt Captain Pratt and make him seem like the unabashed villain of the story. But in some ways, he's presented in a sympathetic light. You also kind of parallel him with L. Frank Baum, who was in the news again because Wicked and Wizard of Oz is so big, as somebody who was ostensibly progressive in some of their thinking. But when it came to Native Americans, L. Frank Baum was wanting to essentially wipe them all out. Pratt, in real life and in your book, is presented slightly more sympathetically, although completely misguided, I think, when we look at it with the benefit of history. You even compare him to Prospero in The Tempest, who I think is another one of those kind of complicated figures who is both, holding slaves on this island and is in some ways the hero of The Tempest. Talk about your decision to handle Captain Pratt in historical fiction in this way.
Pratt wrote an autobiography called Battlefield and Classroom, and really does he's a good writer, and he does quite a good job of explaining where he's coming from with this school. But I think one thing that you have to remember about him, he was a military man, and he was an officer, and he was used to saying, do something, and he explained it more than most military, but he still said, do something, and people saluted and did it.
Right.
At one point, Antoine says, this is a man who does not let a doubt linger in his mind for more than a split second. So once he decided this was the right road, he was not going to graduates of the school, talking to the kids about what was really going on. He was just saying, I've done a wonderful thing for you. Now, go conquer the world. He certainly thought he was doing the right thing, but there was a condescension built into that, and kind of a romantic one. Teddy Roosevelt had the same thing. Oh, they were wonderful people, but their day is over.
Right.
So let's keep some of the trappings and the nice stories, but the people themselves, unless they can act white and make it in the white world, forget about them.
That socialism versus individualism thing rearing its ugly head again.
Right. And when the real numbers are run, later on about how many people were actually killed in these indigenous schools, according to the Washington Post, at least 3,100 students died between 1828 and 1970. So this is not just a distant history. This history resonates even into the latter part of the 20th century, where it was still illegal to use indigenous languages in certain places because of the erasure that was built into what some people believed was the right thing to do, but ultimately we, I think, can see was absolutely a cultural genocide.
Yeah, that interesting thing that we learned from Tamantha, where like America got to keep the culture and Canada got to keep the language.
Right. Tamantha Sylvester, who works with Okiteu, the Cultural Center, Indigenous Cultural Center in Ashfield, Massachusetts, our Ojibwe friend, who is the voice of C-3PO in the Ojibwe dub of Star Wars, to tie it back into filmmaking with John Sayles. It was we did a screening of it at the Shea. We mentioned you there, actually, because you've come and been part of our Cinema Storm at the Shea with Brother from Another Planet and Alligator, which was so much fun.
It's Cheers Goes to Harlem. It's E.T. Rides the Underground Railroad.
Want to see me make all the white people disappear?
125th Street next.
That was fantastic.
It's the Brother from Another Planet.
Such a good movie. If
It
you
is.
haven't seen it, fix it. Soon we'll hear from word nerd Emily Brewster about phrases, a pair of phrases, rather, with unlikely origins as we look at 86 and Deep Six.
But first, more with John Sayles as we explore his latest novel, To Save the Man, before you can meet him tomorrow in person at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley.
Including about the Carlisle School's connection to football and the draw of stories like this to his greater work.
Plus, we'll hear a little bit about what he thinks about movies that got Oscar nominated this year.
Because he saw some and I did not.
You're listening to The Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, offering solar options, energy security, and solutions for the local community. Learn more at northeast-solar.com. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Window World of Western Mass, a local family business with experienced craftsmen offering vinyl, composite, and James Hardie siding. windowworldofwesternma.com.
We're speaking with author and film director, screenwriter, and actor John Sayles, whose new book is To Save the Man. He'll be at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley on Thursday.
I wanted to talk about the inclusion of football here, which I think is incredibly important, especially to the history of the sport, because the importance that the Carlisle School had to the codification of rules for the sport can't be understated, period.
Yeah, just after 1900, Pop Warner became the coach of the Carlisle football team, and he, was in this situation where he didn't, have very big kids. They were undernourished when they got there, and the food at Carlisle wasn't bad, but the kids were not of the size of the teams that they were playing. So he basically started to look in the rule book and say, well, if it's not forbidden in the rule book, we can do it. And so a lot of the plays and inventions of football, he would do them, beat one of these, white teams. And then they'd say, oh, that was a cool play. Let's try that ourselves. So he was very important in that. Eventually, Jim Thorpe came to the school and after a couple of years started playing football for them. And their team started beating the best of the college teams in America. At that time, they were the Ivy League teams and the Army and Navy team. I started this project actually over 20 years ago when I was hired to write a screenplay about a famous football game between the Carlisle Indians and the West Point Cadets, in which the Cadets took a loss, including that their cornerback, Dwight Eisenhower, got knocked out by Jim Thorpe trying to tackle him, something that irked President Eisenhower until his dying day. I think he thought they should have won.
I want to see that movie.
Yeah.
This was also kind of positioned as a screenplay, it says at the end of the book. Was it going to be more than just the football game, or was it going to be, similar to...
Yeah, that never got made, and it wasn't my project. But I got interested in the school and started looking into the history, and I felt like the most dramatic time to set the story was when the school had been going for a while. So I set it in 1890 and 91 because still at Carlisle, the biggest contingent of students were Lakota kids. And that was mostly because in order for the Army to allow Pratt to use their barracks and use some of their cachet to run this school, they really wanted hostages. They wanted Indian kids who were the sons and daughters of some of the chiefs on the various Lakota reservations at that school, figuring, well, they're not going to run off the reservation and cause any trouble. We have their children. That wasn't Pratt's idea, but he bought into it. So these kids are there, they're learning to read and write English, they're reading the newspapers, they're putting out a newspaper themselves, and in the Philadelphia newspapers and some of the other ones they see, they're seeing this train wreck about to happen in the former Dakota Territory in South Dakota of the ghost dance coming, east from Nevada. And as it gets to each tribe, the tribe kind of adopts these dances and these sayings and these beliefs. And when it gets to the most desperate of those reservations in Lakota Territory, there is this belief that, one of the things the creator of all things has told us is that when this second coming happens, bullets will not penetrate us. White people's bullets will not penetrate us. And that gets everybody scared. The new settlers in the Dakotas, the Army gets concerned. There's a new Indian agent at the Pine Ridge Reservation who's nicknamed by the Indians as Young Man Afraid of Indians. Mm-hmm. And he panics and starts saying, they're going to kill us all. And he gets the Army involved. So they see this thing that's going to happen at home, and they're only from their own school getting these, there's nothing to be concerned about. This thing will die out very quickly.
We did mention at the beginning that it does surround the Wounded Knee Massacre and Sitting Bull. These are all pieces of actual history that make their way into this historical fiction, To Save the Man, written by the fabulous John Sayles. I think, John, for those who aren't familiar with you or your work, they may say, what is this, 6-foot-tall white dude doing writing about an Indian school in Pennsylvania and telling this story?
Nevertheless, even though this is the second novel of yours that we've read with strong ties to indigenous community.
And not to mention the fact that this is a very white story, too. And I think that people often forget that, that these are important stories to tell from a white perspective, in the sense that much of what was wrong in this book was perpetrated by white people.
So you can show them and go like, do you see what you did wrong here?
Right. And then if you look at your back, your history here, going back as far as, Brother from Another Planet to Matewan, you're telling these stories over and over again of underrepresented histories. How has this been received by members of the indigenous communities that you've encountered or worked with since writing To Save the Man?
In the readings that I've done so far, we've often had a tribe from the area, or people have moved into the area where we've had readings, mostly on the West Coast. And it has either been them wanting to tell their own stories of the schools that their relatives went to, which are usually not very happy stories,
right?
Or having had relatives who went to the Carlisle school and wanting to talk about that. Somebody came the other day and had a picture of, I think, his great-grandfather playing for the Carlisle Indians in 1903 in a team picture. One great thing that happened in the 20 years since I wrote my own screenplay that also never got made is that Barbara Landis, who was the librarian of the Carlisle Town Library, had these boxes of documents dumped on her by the Army, who really didn't know what to do with them. Those barracks are now the Army War College. You can go there and you can look at the buildings, and they say, Jim Thorpe slept here, but they really don't have anything to tell you about what the Carlisle school was. Mm-hmm. She realized how important this information was. She started to organize it, and then when computers came in, she started to digitize it. So now there's a very good Carlisle Indian School website that you can go onto if you have a relative. And that started people, I heard this story from my father or my grandfather or my grandmother about this school. I'd like to know more. And you can go to that. And anytime their name turns up in the Carlisle records or the Carlisle newspapers, they can hook into that. I think it started with Apsaroki people, from people from the Crow Reservation. People have started to go to Carlisle and repatriate the remains of their ancestors who may have died there when they were 12 years old, 14-year-old, whatever. The main cause of death, there were a couple suicides. The main cause of death there were diseases. Certainly in 1890, there were no antibiotics. I have one chapter that's the doctor, and everything they can do for people in those days is just palliative. Put some cold sponges on their heads and, give them some buttermilk or whatever. And, sometimes the body was the hero and got the kids through that. But you have a bunch of kids who are rooming together, an infirmary where they're right next to each other in the bed. And even at a white school, kids would die in great numbers. Also, many kids already were afflicted with diseases when they got there, especially the Apache kids from the San Carlos reservation. There was a lot of tuberculosis there. So, I think finally, people are just interested. I write things because I know something about something, but I want to know more. Mm-hmm. And that leads you to a lot of either forgotten, or I would say in many cases, purposely hidden history.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I feel like that ties into some of the portrayal of the press in this book also, not just through the newspaper that they're creating themselves, but like the book that Miss Burris has made, which is a bit of a problem. And then there's a scene where a pile of newspaper reporters are expected to report on what's happening there, and they are, I'm saying in air quotes. But there's an interesting way that I think ties the way that people's perceptions end up on paper, both in poetry and in print for news, that you take in this book.
Yeah, those are all real people. Almost everything that's portrayed as being in a newspaper is pretty much verbatim. And the same thing with the textbooks that the kids are reading. I think of the textbooks that I had when I was in grade school in the early 50s, and they're pretty hair-raising if you think about them now. Even at the time, some of them I just thought, really? I don't think that could be true. But certainly in 1890, it was a pretty racist official story. And the newspapers, there's an old newspaperman's phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the press was certainly as culpable for the Wounded Knee Massacre as the Army was. They were there to stir up trouble. In my book, Moment in the Sun, which deals partly with the Philippine-American War and the Spanish-American War, there's this famous incident where William Randolph Hearst, who was kind of the Rupert Murdoch of his day, he had sent Frederick Remington down to Cuba, where there was an insurrection against the Spanish. And he said, I need some pictures of, Spanish atrocities and terrible things so I can get us into this war. Mm-hmm. And Remington sent him a telegram saying, I'm here in Havana, nothing's happening. And he telegraphed back, you supply the pictures, I'll supply the war. And he basically built up this war fever to the point where President McKinley pretty much had to declare war on Spain. Whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, we don't know. But definitely there would not have been a war unless the press at the moment wanted to increase their circulation.
We're speaking with John Sayles, the novelist, the independent film director, the screenwriter, the actor, whose new book is To Save the Man. It sheds light on the American tragedy of the Carlisle School and the Wounded Knee Massacre. He will be at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley this Thursday evening. Before we let you go, John, I know you've been nominated for 2 Academy Awards. Mm-hmm. Any favorites from the year gone by now that all the Oscar nominations are out, either Oscar nominated or otherwise?
I saw a couple mainstream movies I really liked. I just saw Wicked the other day. I thought they did a very good job with that. I really liked Furiosa, which is considered kind of a loser because it didn't make enough money, but it was a really, really, really good movie.
It's a part of the Mad Max canon.
I mean, like the first, it was going to be hard to capitalize on how good Fury Road was, but I think they did well.
Yeah. I liked Nora,
yes.
Which is kind of a wild and crazy movie, but also funny, and some really good performances by people I didn't know.
Right.
Sing Sing is worth a look. Some incredible professional actors, and then some wonderful performances by what I always like to call new actors. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of good movies this year. Somehow they get made, and somehow you just, how did that get made? Very often. And then there were kind of things that were just kind of, okay, well, it's the fifth one in the sequel, it's the sixth one, it's Fast and Furious 29.
Oh, God.
Well, hopefully we'll have you back on as you are helping to produce our friend Bob Kraskowski's forthcoming movie, Grendel. And we've had Brian Henson on talking about that, and we'll maybe welcome you back on as that gets a little bit closer to going into production. But meanwhile, read this new book. It is fascinating. While I often struggle with historical fiction because I have a hard time sussing out fact from fiction, this one seems very, very clear. It is called To Save the Man. John Sayles will be presenting this book and in conversation about it at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley this Thursday.
It was great. It was just very intense.
It is intense, but it is wonderfully written and an excellent book.
Beautifully written.
Thanks, John.
Take care.
The John Sayles event at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley starts at 7 p.m. on January 30th and is free and open to the public, but they do ask that you RSVP through their website or Eventbrite.
Not that they'll deep six you if you don't.
I don't think that's how that phrase works.
Well, we'll see when word nerd Emily Brewster excavates the beginnings of 86 and Deep Six.
You're listening to The Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
Elise, your band was so great. That was such a fun show.
Thank you. I'm glad that you liked us. Thank you for coming and staying out so late.
Yeah.
It is your bar.
That's true. But, people can go home and, sleep. Sleep is nice sometimes.
Yeah, it was great. I was very glad I didn't miss it.
Yay.
Even I rallied all the way to the end on the vestiges of my flu.
It's appreciated.
Yeah.
Also, thank you for getting me a Fernet before we started. It's basically the same as, throat coat.
Ain't no thing. What are we talking about, Emily Brewster?
Did you ever send the question that we got for her?
I did send a couple things your way.
Okay.
Oh, you did, and I have not paid any attention to them yet. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Don't worry. We'll get to them eventually.
Yeah.
All right.
And you listeners should continue to send those questions.
Yes, please.
I thought we would talk about the term 86.
Oh, all right. Emily Brewster, resident wordster for Merriam Webster, our dictionary in Springfield, Massachusetts. 1986. I was 8 years old. Let me think.
It's the year my sister was born.
I'm trying to remember what might have happened when I was...
I got to see it because she was born in the house.
Oh, wow. Intense.
All over the house.
1986 has nothing to do, I don't think, with what we're going to talk about. Well, we are going to talk about 86.
Yes.
What does 86 mean, and where does it come from?
Well, it has a number of meanings. It's an informal term, and probably the most familiar meaning is to refuse to serve a customer.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
So a person can be 86th at an establishment. It can also mean to eject or ban a customer. So not only are you not going to be served, but you're not even allowed inside the place.
I've met some people that have been 86 from the aforementioned bar that we were just at the other day. I am not one of them. However, one time I accidentally brought one of those people in with me. Oh, dear.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get 86 from the VU, but it does happen.
This person deserved it.
Oh. I'm curious, but also
I'll
I'm
tell you
afraid.
off the air.
But
yes,
it can also have several other meanings. So you can use kind of outside a restaurant establishment or outside a business establishment. You can also use the term 86 more broadly to mean to eject, dismiss, or remove someone. For example, we have instances of people being 86th from, say, Twitter back in the day when that would happen.
Yeah, even the current president of the United States.
Right. the word 86 also means, as anyone who works in the restaurant industry will know, that if you remove an item from a menu or to no longer offer an item to customers, then in more broadly, you can just use it to talk about getting rid of something beyond the restaurant environment.
Or if you're out of something from the menu, like we would have an 86 list in the kitchen. You just write the items that we don't have anymore for the night.
Those are
That's right.
As we run out of them.
So right, if it's not on the menu, it means people can't order it anymore. Yep. So right, that's also 86ing something from a menu. But it's unusual in that this word does not come from any of the usual sources of slang and informal vocabulary.
What are the usual sources?
Well, a very prominent source is ballroom culture, Black culture and music. Military is another common source of slang and informal language. Pop culture, more broadly. But this comes from the world of soda jerks.
Whoa, that is not where I thought that came from.
Not the Buffalo Tom song. Although I wonder if that song came out in 1986.
Oh, I think that's way too early.
I think it is too early, too.
Their first album comes out in like 91, 92.
Let's see. 1993.
Oh, I was close. I was getting to there.
Yeah, so talk about soda jerk culture.
Right. Soda jerk culture is, those people who work as soda jerkers, a soda jerker being someone who dispenses soda, which, nobody is really a soda jerker anymore, but people used to be. And the jerk in that comes from the movement, which is now really more like reserved to beer taps, right?
Yeah.
Where you jerk an object forward to dispense a liquid.
And I know beer jerks, but that's not what you call bartenders. That's what you call people who have been 86'd from bars.
So you showed up at the VU with a beer jerk?
I did.
Except that, Monty, in the mid-19th century, a beer jerker was someone who served beer. That is the oldest use of the word jerker in this particular sense.
Interesting.
Beer jerker.
Berserker.
Would you like an ale or stout beer jerker?
So we know that it is from a soda jerk that 86 comes from, but how?
Yeah, this is where things get a little strange because this is an Americanism, but the best explanation for the etymology of 86 is that it is rhyming slang for nix.
Ah.
Huh. That is so different from what I was told the origin of that phrase was.
What is the story you heard about it?
I heard that that's the circumference of a trash can, which is why when you're talking about 86ing something, it's trashed, it's off the menu.
Weird. I love that.
Wow.
I like that story
I had
better.
not heard that one.
Yeah.
There are other theories too that the first restaurant establishment where 86 was used was, its address had the number 86 in it. Mm-hmm. And so people came to associate being kicked out of that place with being 86th, which really doesn't make much sense either.
No, because
these false etymologies abound.
Yeah.
Although that is kind of hilarious.
But you would think you would be welcomed in if you were 86 from a place that was at 86 something or other.
Or it becomes such a thing that's just what they do. You go there to be kicked out, like a rite of passage.
Yeah, could be.
Which is quite a business model, really.
I don't know. People go to certain places to be insulted. It is a thing.
What's up, losers? Put your damn phone down.
Their hats have insults on them.
Hey, where's our hats?
You just sat down, you
What's the evidence that 86 and nix rhyme that Merriam Webster is using for what the go-to etymology is for this strange use of this number?
That is a very good question. And I don't really have, give me just a minute.
Well, while we look that up, I'll talk about other things that happened in 1986, including the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster.
Exploding.
Oh my God, I remember I was homesick from school.
I wasn't.
It was devastating.
But I remember the whole day being in Miss Levi's class at Lincoln Hartwell in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and our whole day was dedicated to talking about it because we were all just like traumatized.
I remember my mom, who was homesick with me when I was homesick, just bursting into tears, and I didn't understand what happened because I thought they just turned on like the turbo boosters or something like that, but I was so very wrong. Chernobyl happened in 1986. Some of the big movies. Blue Velvet.
What kind of beer do you like? Heineken? F*** that Pabst Blue Ribbon!
The David Lynch movie. Big Trouble in Little China.
You know what old Jack Burton always says at a time like this?
Who?
Jack Burton. Me. Old Jack always says, what the hell?
Color Money. Highlander, Howard the Duck.
That's an interesting juxtaposition.
Yes, albums from 1986. Peter Gabriel So, Master of Puppets from Metallica, Life's Rich Pageant, REM, Graceland by Paul Simon, Parade by
True
Prince and the
Stories.
Revolution.
Talking Heads.
Raising Hell, Run DMC, 5150, Van Halen. So, okay, back to other things that happened in 1986. Oh, no, back to 86.
Back to 86. Unfortunately, whatever it is that is the foundation for this theory that is, again, recognized by both Merriam Webster and Oxford as being the most likely origin of 86, that it is rhyming slang for nicks, that has been lost to time. It is only speculation that ties them together. But I guess it's the best idea. The funny thing to me about this is that 86 is definitely an American term, and rhyming slang is really very British.
Uh-huh.
Have we talked about rhyming slang before?
A little bit.
A little
I
bit.
think yes. So it's known especially for being used in Cockney English, right? That dialect of London speech.
Right.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain.
And it's the idea is that you take one word and you create a rhyme for it, and then you drop the thing that connects it more transparently to what you're referring to, and you just keep the rhyme. And so, we don't know what nix. I guess it would be that we're going to nix this, or we're going to nix this person. We're going to get rid of this person, and then just rhyming that with 86 and going with 86. Kind of different from the put up your dukes, which is, I think, the one we talked about before, right? You had put up your dukes. Dukes are fists, of course, but dukes was short for Dukes of York, and Dukes of York was rhyming slang for put up your forks, and fists were forks. So, the idea that it's rhyming slang for nicks is a much less convoluted story than is typical for rhyming slang derivations.
And why 86? Why not just 6? That's like adding all these extra syllables.
But it's got to rhyme with a particular mix in that case, right?
You just said,
I don't know.
Who knows?
Let's 6 this person as opposed to 86. It seemed arbitrary. It could have been 406. Why 86?
Right.
Also,
Who knows?
The Dukes of Hazzard was canceled in 1985.
Them Duke boys, they'll be coming by here just any moment now. I can feel it in my bones.
The other funny thing about this is that the word nix is only about 30 years older than the word 86.
Huh.
Okay, so where did nix come from?
Well,
New York.
Where did nix come
that's
from?
spelled
well,
differently.
its origin is the German word nichts, meaning nothing.
Oh.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
That's etymologically seems like a sound logical conclusion.
Yeah.
Still the 86.
I mean, now I'm just transported to some imaginary soda shop, and there is a recent immigrant there working behind the counter, and there's German being thrown around, and nix and soda being jerked, and there you go.
1986 was also the year of Labyrinth.
You remind me of the Babe.
Flight of the Navigator, Short Circuit, and the John Sayles movie, The Clan of the Cave Bear.
There is an anime series that is called 86.
Is it about the year or about kicking people out of your bar?
It is about a lot of death. And it is about military operations and the people who are dispensable.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very dark. But like they're taking that meaning of being thrown out, being cast out as the root of the name for the series.
Very interesting. Now, there's also a use of the word nix to refer to a supernatural creature. It comes from originally Germanic folklore. The most common iteration of it is a creature that is half woman and half fish.
I've heard of nixies, but I've never heard them called nix.
Yeah.
Isn't Nyx a Greek god? But spelled differently with a Y and YX?
And YX.
It looks like vegan lip makeup to me when I just do a quick Google search. Who is Nyx in Greek mythology, though? Hold on. Female personification of night.
This is what the internet is
feared even by Zeus.
Thanks, the game Hades, for reminding me of that.
Thanks, the internet. Is 86 still being used very commonly from what Merriam Webster is finding?
Outside of restaurants.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah. No, the entry was recently revised because the use of the word has really expanded. And it's moved from beyond just the food service industry to all kinds of more general contexts. Like I said before, you can 86 somebody from a social media platform, for example, or you can 86 a person from any kind of a space.
The clear parallel between the people that the federal government is currently trying to 86 from the country.
The License to Ill album from the Beastie Boys was also released in 1986.
Are you trying to lift it back up?
Little Shop of Horrors?
Look, you need to stop.
So we have this word 86. Again, it enters use, as far as we can tell, from soda jerk culture in the 1930s. By the mid-1940s, we have another similar term that is deep six. To deep six is to throw overboard or to get rid of, discard, or eliminate. So that discard, eliminate, that sense is actually, pretty close to being synonymous with one of the senses of 86 also. So 86 and deep six have this overlap of meaning. Now, deep six is also a noun. It's a place of disposal or abandonment. It's very grim there. Used especially in the phrase, give it the deep six.
This sounds more like Khalees's trash barrel idea, also with just the idea of six and Nyx, not a random 86. Feels like it's more connected to what the going idea of the etymology is.
Why does six keep being connected with things that are essentially excised or thrown away?
Nyx six.
Yeah. I mean, six is not a favored number. Now, this one, though, is we have a much more concrete etymology. Deep six comes from the leadsman's call by the deep six for a depth corresponding to the sixth deep on a sounding line.
Whoa.
So now we're on a boat.
I'm on a boat! I'm on a boat!
Right, which is a nautical, I think we've talked before about words with nautical etymologies. That is also a rich source of slang and informal vocabulary historically. Those words of the sea.
I love nautical terms. They're just lovely.
Yeah, and if you're not going to deep six, but you're going to deep space nine, know that didn't come out until 1993. So
Yes.
it's nothing to do with 86 either.
But it is still the best of the Star Trek series. I will die on this hill.
In the meantime, however, I will do the job I've been ordered to do to the best of my ability, sir.
I appreciate 1986 for bringing my sister Kia, who I adore, even if she was literally born all over our house. I'll explain that when we're done recording.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the story about who I brought into the rendezvous who was 86th from there. Oh, listener, if only you could be listening when we are in our underwriting. If you have a question for the Word Nerd, as I know some of you have and have sent them, send them our way, thefab413@nepm.org. And the Word Nerd, when she has time, will get to researching some of your queries. She's not 86ing them. We're just putting them on the back burner.
Also, time is real and sometimes gets away from you. We know that for real. Time 86 is itself.
Just like the Somewhere in Time album by Iron Maiden that was released in 1986.
Lean in.
It was fun going back and looking at things at 1986. Although you could tell me, hey, can you name one thing that happened in 2006? I wouldn't be able to tell you.
I know a couple of things. I moved back to the Valley in 2006.
There you go. But what was a historical event or something? No idea.
Yeah.
I barely know things that happened in 2024.
Well, we know some things that happened in 2024.
And every day, something new happens in 2025.
After we stopped talking with her, I remembered the phrase "on your six," which I wish I'd brought up as soon as we got into the Navy term of.
What does that mean?
It means somebody's behind you.
On your six.
So it's on your six.
Like coming in at 2 or 10, like that.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Oh yeah, they're behind you. That makes sense. Or 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah.
Football stuff. Pick six.
Yeah.
But that makes sense. All of those make sense.
That a little bit more sense, yeah. And none of them, the other thread being that none of them are about throwing things away. Which is the interesting thread between deep sixing something and 86ing it.
Yeah. And then there's ixnay, which I was also thinking about. But that's pig Latin. But nix must have come before ixnay. We can assume.
Yes.
Anyway.
More deep thoughts from us. You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
If you are more curious about the connection between the Carlisle Indian School and American football, let's not forget that the rest of the world calls soccer football.
That's right.
It is.
Which we talked about with John Sayles, if you missed it earlier in the show, in his new book, To Save the Man.
In fact, we did. There is another book that focuses specifically on it, but since you are all loyal NPR listeners, if you go back into the annals of This American Life, they did a whole, is it This American Life? It might be Radiolab. Oh, I'm so good at this. It's one of those two shows for sure, but they did a whole episode on the games that started codifying the rules of football and the games that the Carlisle Indian School played against Harvard and Yale that began that whole process. It's really fascinating. It's one of the best episodes, I think, of, I'm going to say it's Radiolab, that I've heard. And it really goes into depth on like the connections between them, the holes they saw in the rules, and some of what the Carlisle Indian School students were experiencing on campus as they went into those games.
And you can talk to John Sayles about it in person if you'd like. He'll be at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley tomorrow evening. It is not John Sayles that was 86th from the Rendezvous Bar.
No, he seems like a lovely person.
He
both
is.
Times.
He doesn't drink. And also, I did spend, full disclosure, a little time in the Polish clubs of Turner's Falls with none other than John Sayles. So that's to add that he's not been 86 from any of those bars. Well, on the next Fabulous 413, we'll visit the Lava Center and speak with Vanessa Query, manager of that art space, about the center's history and how they'll commemorate it during Greenfield's Winter Carnival this weekend in honor of the Lava Center's 5th birthday.
We will have a double dose of music with the duo High Tea and Wallace Field, who are co-billing a show in Northampton on Friday. At the Iron Horse. Plus, we'll have our weekly chat with Congressman Jim McGovern, who may have a lot to say about what's happened this week. If you have a question for him,
email us, thefab413@nepm.org, and do it sooner than later because, I want to make sure to get to all those questions if I can. I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.